In the autumn of 1923, it took 4.2 trillion German marks to buy a single US dollar. People carried wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread and burned money in their stoves because it was cheaper than firewood. But one man, Hugo Stinnes, emerged from the ashes of the German hyperinflation, not just rich, but unimaginably powerful. He wasn't a politician, he was an industrialist, a billionaire of his age. While a nation crumbled, he built an empire of over 4,500 companies. His story is not an anomaly, it is a blueprint repeated whenever the delicate pact between a state and its currency shatters, and the same architects always appear. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Stinnes saw the collapse coming. During World War I, he pressed the German government to finance the war not with taxes, but with debt the central bank would monetize, printing the money to pay for it. He knew this would unleash inflation, so he borrowed massively. He took out enormous loans in soon-to-be worthless marks and used them to buy hard assets, coal mines, steel plants, shipping lines, newspapers. As the printing presses ran, his debt evaporated. The currency melted, but his holdings soared in real value. He didn't just survive the collapse, he engineered it and then feasted on the carcass. He turned economic chaos into a personal monopoly. But this is more than a history lesson. It's a playbook. Fast forward to 1997. Thailand. The Asian tiger economy is booming, fueled by hot money and dollar-denominated debt. A cabal of powerful, connected financiers and industrialists know the currency. The baht is dangerously overvalued. They don't warn the public. They don't alert the government. They quietly make their move. They borrow billions of baht domestically. Then they launch a coordinated, massive assault on the currency in the foreign exchange markets. They bet billions it will fail. On July 2nd, 1997, the Thai government capitulates. The baht is devalued. Overnight, Thai companies with dollar debts are bankrupt. Millions lose their jobs, their life savings. But the billionaires who triggered the crash, they pocket fortunes from their bets. They then use those fortunes to buy national assets, banks, real estate, utilities, at fire sale prices as the country is forced into a humiliating IMF bailout. They didn't just see the crisis, they willed it into existence. The nation paid the price. They captured the reward. The same fire that destroys a forest enriches the soil. This is the hidden rhythm of catastrophe. The pattern is surgical. First, identify a system under immense strain, a currency peg, a debt bubble, a political fissure. Then take a position that profits from its failure. Often, this involves using immense leverage to attack the very foundation of the economy. Finally, when the crisis hits and the population is reeling, use the profits to acquire real wealth at a discount. This isn't mere speculation, it's economic engineering on a national scale. The target is the sovereignty of a nation's economy itself, and the ultimate tool for this is leverage. Now, let's pull the lens to the present. The game has evolved, but the players have the same fingerprints. Today's billionaires don't just attack currencies with borrowed money. They can shape the narratives that make currencies vulnerable. They can fund political movements that destabilize governments. They can lobby for policies that create unsustainable bubbles. They operate in the gray zone where high finance, media influence, and political power fuse into a single weapon. Their battlefield is no longer just the forex market. It's the bond market, the digital sphere, the very trust that holds a society together. Because when trust evaporates, money follows. And that is the modern trigger point. So how does this pattern manifest not in a single currency raid, but in the slow, deliberate reshaping of an entire nation's economic destiny? The next chapter isn't about a sudden crash, it's about a controlled demolition. Consider Russia in the 1990s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the state embarked on a controversial loans for shares scheme. A handful of well-connected financiers, the future oligarchs, lent money to the nearly bankrupt government. The collateral? Shares in the crown jewels of the Soviet economy, oil fields, nickel mines, telecommunications. The government, desperate for cash, accepted. It was a deal forged in a crisis. When the government predictably failed to repay the tiny loans, these men seized ownership of industries worth hundreds of billions. They didn't build these companies. They captured them during a national emergency. Through a series of calculated moves during a period of profound weakness, they effectively transferred a superpower's wealth into private hands. The economic collapse for millions created the greatest concentration of billionaire wealth in modern history. Power is never given, it is only taken. The aftermath is always written in human cost. In Germany, it led to the rise of extremism and the ashes of World War II. In Thailand and across Asia, it created a lost generation and simmering political resentment. In Russia, it collapsed life expectancy and created a mafia state. The billionaires who crash countries are rarely held to account. They often become celebrated, seen as geniuses who navigated the storm. But their navigation is what created the hurricane for everyone else. They operate with a cold calculus. National stability is not their concern. Systemic risk is their opportunity. Your position in the economy determines whether you are a target or an archer. So, what is the actionable insight? You cannot out-leverage a billionaire. You cannot front-run their political access, but you can recognize the patterns. You can see the signs of a system under coordinated stress. When narratives turn violently against a nation's financial foundations, when capital flight begins under dubious justifications, when asset prices detach from reality under a flood of cheap debt. Your defense is not complexity. It is historical clarity and foundational assets. Understand that during these engineered crises, paper wealth is the target. Real assets, productive land, essential commodities, tools, skills, and yes, stored value outside the immediate system are what endure. They trade in illusions of wealth to seize the substance of it. To see the future, you must first recognize the past. We are living in an age of unprecedented leverage, narrative warfare, and currency experimentation. The conditions are ripe for the next iteration of this ancient play. The stakes are not just your portfolio, they are the stability of the societies we live in. The billionaires who crash countries are not monsters from a fable. They are a recurring feature of the system, a symptom of what happens when immense concentrated capital meets a fragile state. They remind us of a brutal truth. In the geometry of power, the collapse of a nation is often just the transfer of its energy into new private hands. And the final, inevitable lesson is this: the greatest fortunes are built not despite chaos, but because of it. The 2008 global financial crisis was framed as a failure of banks, but it was also a harvesting of nations. While governments spent trillions in public funds to bail out the system, a specific breed of investor was quietly positioning for the kill shot. They weren't just shorting subprime mortgages, they were targeting the very sovereign states that went into debt to save their banks. Their weapon was the bond market, their prey was entire countries, and their playbook was a century old. They bet on the collapse of a nation's credit, and when it falls, the profit is astronomical. Look at Greece. By 2010, the Greek government was drowning in debt after the bank bailouts. A group of hedge funds, led by figures like John Paulson, who famously made $4 billion betting against the U.S. housing market, saw an opportunity. They began aggressively buying credit default swaps on Greek government bonds. Essentially, they were buying insurance on a car they didn't own, betting it would crash. Then, they used their influence and massive capital to amplify every piece of bad news, to question every bailout, to drive the narrative that a Greek default was inevitable. They helped turn a liquidity crisis into a solvency crisis. The pressure became unbearable. Chaos is a ladder with very few rungs. The interest rates Greece had to pay to borrow money soared above 30%. The country was forced into punishing austerity measures by the EU and IMF to secure bailout loans. Pensions were slashed, public services evaporated, youth unemployment hit 50%, society was torn apart, and the billionaires who bet on the disaster, they made fortunes estimated in the hundreds of millions, if not billions. They profited from the precise depth of the suffering. They didn't create the initial Greek debt, but they engineered the scale of the collapse. Once again, a national crisis became a private transfer of wealth. The template is now digital and faster than ever. Now enter the era of the crypto state. This is the new frontier for engineered collapse and capture. A billionaire doesn't need to attack a traditional currency. He can create a rival system, pump it with hype and leverage, and then pull the foundation out from under thousands, even millions of people. Look at Terra Luna in 2022. Its founder, Do Kwon, built a so-called algorithmic stablecoin that promised impossible, anchor-like stability. It attracted tens of billions in investment. Then the design, fundamentally flawed, met a coordinated market attack. The result was a $45 billion collapse in days. Ordinary people lost life savings. But on-chain data suggests sophisticated whales, potentially with insider knowledge of the system's fragility, shorted the coin massively just before its death spiral. They made millions as a digital nation of believers was wiped out. This is the modern, decentralized version of crashing a country. It's building the temple, inviting everyone in, and then controlling the detonator. The scale is smaller, but the pattern is identical. The medium changes. The motive does not. So, where does this leave you? The viewer, the citizen, the participant in this system. You are not powerless, but you must shift your mindset. First, understand that the most dangerous stories are the ones that promise stability without substance. Whether it's a currency peg, a perpetual debt machine, or an algorithmic financial utopia, be skeptical of perfect systems. They are the most tempting targets. Second, recognize that in times of perceived stability, the smartest money is already planning for the crisis. They are taking positions that will pay only if things break. Your goal is not to be them, but to avoid being their fuel. Don't be the mark holding the devalued currency. Be the one holding what they aim to acquire. This means building personal sovereignty. Diversify across jurisdictions and asset classes they cannot easily manipulate. Own tangible, useful assets. Develop skills that are valuable in any economic climate. Reduce your exposure to systemic leverage, the massive debts and complex financial products that act as contagion pathways when they fail. Most importantly, learn to read the signs of engineered stress. When media narratives become hysterically one-sided against a particular asset class or country, when financial flows defy logic, when sure things are being peddled to the masses, that is the gathering storm. The storm is not an accident. It is a season. We are at a convergence point. Global debt is at record highs. Currency wars are simmering. Digital and traditional systems are clashing. This is the environment where the billionaire playbook is most lethal. They have the capital, the data, and the networks to act with precision while the public reacts with panic. Your defense is historical literacy. See the long game. Recognize that Hugo Stinnes in 1923, the Thai bot attackers in 1997, the Russian oligarchs, the Greek bond short sellers, and the crypto whales are all variations of the same archetype. They are the shock troops of creative destruction, and populations are the battlefield. This is not conspiracy. It is the recurring mechanics of power. To navigate what comes next, you must internalize a single, transformative idea. The greatest financial shocks of our time are not natural disasters. They are often calculated projects. The crumbling of a nation's economy is not an end. For a select few, it is the beginning, a fertile ground from which new empires of private control are born. Your survival, your prosperity, depends on seeing the difference between the crisis and the engineered collapse, between bad luck and a coordinated strike, between chaos and the quiet order that profits from it. The final, resonant truth echoes across a century. In the economy of nations, collapse is not an outcome, it is a transaction. If you learned something new today, hit subscribe. There's always more history waiting to be uncovered here on Econ Prime.